My name is Lucia Capacchione, and I answer to cappuccino if you give me a cup. So it's really an honor to be here today for many reasons. I am the only child of a couple who later in life divorced. So when they both went through their end of life transitions, I was the one. It fell on my shoulders to manage their care, to be there part-time, to have someone living in the case of my mother. We weren't dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's, but I really know what it's like to be in that caregiver role and have all the responsibility. It's tough. And I went through that twice with a bunch of years in between. But in those bunch of years in between, I was working a lot with cancer support groups, with caregiving medical staffs and so forth. And one of the things I learned very early on was that caregivers who are professional caregivers do not know how to take care of themselves, generally speaking. They don't get trained to do that. And I'll give you an example. When I have offered workshops in the state of Texas, on occasion, I have been told that if it's for professional caregivers, nurses, doctors, social workers, I cannot put in the brochure that they are going to learn tools to take care of themselves. I can only put that I am going to give them tools to work with their patients and their clients. And that's a sad state of affairs. I was quite shocked the first time it happened because we were giving continuing education units, and those are the requirements. You can't do this for the staff. They have to do it for the patients. So I started to talk to some of these people over lunch and in breaks, and I saw how terribly burnt out they were. They were exhausted, emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted. A lot of them had their own chronic pain situations. A lot of them had family members that they were caregivers for at home. And it really broke my heart to hear those stories. So fast forward a few years ago, one of our graduates, Shelley, came up to the Bay Area, and she was working in marketing, and she ended up at Kensington Place. And we had talked about the lack of guidance, not only for professional caregivers, but family caregivers, and how important it is to support those. So I started writing articles like, who cares for the caregiver? Because you can't give from an empty cup. You just cannot. I know, I've been there. And so when she got into Kensington Place, we talked about providing the methods that I have developed that appear in my 15 commercially published books and a lot of other workbooks and handbooks, and making that available to the staff. And so we brought in Dr. Marcia Nelson from Texas, who is my business partner in a professional training program, to offer workshops for the staff, occasionally for the residents, and for family members. And of course now informational workshops and events for the public. And I want to tell you, I'm not being hired as a marketing consultant here, but I do want to tell you, I know from the inside that the training and the caregiving support that the staff is getting at Kensington is, as far as I'm concerned, top of the line. And that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of care they're giving the residents, because they're getting nurtured. Marcia Nelson even goes in the middle of the night and does workshops for the night crew. Nobody does that. And they will say that. She'll get in there at 1 or 2 in the morning and do a workshop for them, because when she heard they weren't getting anything, she said, that's terrible. You can't leave those people out. They're having a difficult time. Their circadian rhythm gets really crazy because they're working at night. And so she's offered that, and I am very impressed with the kind of support that's going on in-house. That's essential to me. And I know because I was shopping around for residential care for my father at one time, And those were the questions I was asking, and the administrators hadn't been asked that question before. I would say, what do you do for your staff? And kind of get this glazed look. And I went to one place and I got an answer that I liked, so I definitely, decided to have my dad live there. It is a very difficult decision. Now, how many of you in here are professional caregivers? Anybody in this group today? Yes, okay, yes, anybody else? And how many of you have family members or are considering a residence for a family member? Anybody else here? Yeah. So caregiving, as the word indicates, is really about putting one's focus and empathy on the needs of other people. What do they need? What can we do for these individuals who need one or another kind of care? And that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of setting your ego aside if you're really doing it well. And it takes a tremendous amount of empathy, which is not easy to come by. That's something you really got to develop and work on, because it's hard to feel empathetic when you're exhausted or when you're in chronic pain. It's really difficult. I know, I've been there. I went through illness during the time I was taking care of my parents, so I had to get help. And that's the other aspect, is getting help. And so it's a real challenge. And so the tools that I had developed, I developed in the process of healing myself from a life-threatening illness. So I know these tools work. I had an illness that at the time was misdiagnosed, but later on it was correctly diagnosed, and it was in the family of lupus. And I came down with that when I was 35 years old. I was a single parent with 2 young children, and I just couldn't function anymore. I was totally exhausted. So I went to bed, and I was having the problem with side effects from medications that had been given because I had been misdiagnosed in the first place. And so all the medications that were given to me were just for side effects. It was a downward spiral. It was terrifying. And I really felt that I was going to die. I did not think I was going to survive that situation. And the straw that broke the camel's back was the pharmacy calling me and saying, don't take that medication we gave you, that was somebody else's prescription. Oh. We got it mixed up. And I said, well, I've already taken it, and I'm already having side effects. I've been having dizziness and nausea, and I almost threw up, and I described the symptoms, and they said, yeah, don't take that. So I went into I got really furious at that point. And I went in the medicine chest, and I took all the medicines out, and I took the lids off, and I threw them all in the trash one at a time. Something in me said, this is not working. I cannot continue on this path. So I went and sat in my bed, and I asked myself, what has been working during this summer that I've been so ill? Has anything given me any comfort or any relief? And the answer was, that sketch pad that you've turned into a journal where you're writing your dreams down, you're writing your feelings, and you're drawing pictures of how you feel, et cetera, et cetera. That makes you feel better. And so I just did the sensible thing. I did what worked, and I stopped doing what didn't work. And I am in no way ever recommending that you throw your medications away. But in my case, it was the right thing to do. So the journal became my medicine. I started really seriously taking a lot of time drawing my feelings out and writing about them. And I had a lot of dreams at night. I'd write them down, and I would just get all these feelings out on paper. I went into therapy at the same time, and my therapist was very excited about what I was learning in my journal about myself, and she encouraged me to continue doing that on my own. That led to a book of mine called The Creative Journal. Do you have a copy here? Which is a guide to journal keeping using drawing and writing. That method is the foundation of everything else. So the books that we have here today are basically the creative journal method, and they are applied to specific uses. So what is this method and why does it work? Well, scientifically, we know there's been research done many times, and it all came out with the same result, is that if you draw and write your feelings out, and especially with writing, we know that blood tests before and after this project in control group studies showed that writing your feelings out, trauma, any kind of upset, actually improves your immune system. They did pre and post blood tests with these writing groups. And the groups that were just writing about trivia, there was no change in their immune system in the blood test. But those who were writing about troublesome situations and challenges and trauma, their immune system function improved dramatically after they did that writing project. And this research has been replicated many times. So this is hardcore science now. We know that writing can be very therapeutic if you're allowing yourself to get beyond trivia. You know, like I had lunch with Aunt Jane today and that kind of diary stuff that's just a catalog of what you did. But if you go inside and you get your feelings out on the page, then you have a different experience and your body reacts differently. So instead of carrying the emotions around in the body, and there's a lot of research about this in the art therapy field, what happens is when we don't let things out, they stay in the body. Okay? So you talk about, oh, so-and-so's a pain in the neck. He gives me a headache. I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. We use phrases like this all the time. Oh, I can't stomach that. Why do we use those terms? Those are all physical descriptions because that's a reality. Every emotion that we do not acknowledge and express in a safe way goes in the body. There's no other place for it to go. Emotional energy is either going to go out or it's going to go in. Now, it can go out safely and productively, or it can go out destructively, and I don't need to talk about what's going on in the world as an example of what happens when emotions go out destructively. Okay? But if you have a safe place to put the emotions, and that's the key, a safe place. What is a safe place? Well, for me, it's a personal journal that's confidential. We do this in school systems, K through 12, and we have found improvement in children's health by doing this because we're not grading them, we're letting them draw their fear about tests out, and then when they take the test, their grades are better. We did a research project in Texas, K through 6. That school got 6 academic distinctions in the year that we were doing journaling with those kids. Why? Because instead of being nervous on testing day and just locking up and shutting down, they had already drawn all their feelings out. So they went to those tests and they just sailed right through them. These are standard Texas state tests. And that school had never gotten academic distinctions before. The other thing was behavioral improvement. The children became more empathetic with each other. They stopped hitting each other and bullying, and they stopped being sent to the principal's office. Okay? And they were learning how to relate to each other in a really caring way. And the teachers noticed it. Why? Because they were being respected for their feelings, and they could get their feelings out in a journal instead of getting their feelings out in destructive behavior. If they were frustrated, they just put it in the journal. Draw a picture of it. What does it look like? What color is it? Scribble it out. Write about it. Write about it. Now you're practicing writing. Of course you're going to have academic gains because you're writing about what? Your own life. What could be more interesting than your own life? Everybody's interested in their own life. So these kids are motivated to write. Okay? So that's not relevant for our age level. We're not concerned about learning to read and write, but we do need to learn emotional literacy because we never learned that in school. Being able to accept how we feel. And it's very difficult as a caregiver because most caregivers feel, well, I have to concern myself with the needs of my patients or my family members. I don't have a right to complain. She's dying of cancer. My best friend right now is dying of cancer and she has Alzheimer's. So I lost her a long time ago. I grew up with her. I've known her since kindergarten. and she started to show signs of Alzheimer's many years ago. And gradually, I have lost the friend I had. She recognizes me because she remembers things from childhood, but nothing from the recent past. And that has been heartbreaking, really heartbreaking. And I just got word last week that she has a cancerous tumor in her spine and they can't do any chemo. So it's a matter of time. So it's hard for the caregivers to start, they go, well, I have no right to complain. The patient is in pain, or my husband or my wife or whoever, they're the ones, they've got the problems. They're getting the chemo, they're getting radiation. I have to focus on that. I don't have a right to sit here and complain about my feelings, but you do have a right to have your feelings and to express them safely, and a good place to start is in a journal. My illness was caused by 5 years of grief that never got expressed, it never got felt. My father was bipolar, he was given shock treatments, my parents got divorced, I got divorced, I moved 3 times. It was chaos for 5 years, and I never complained, and I never thought I had a right to complain. It was just like, this is life, and you just get through it. But my body was complaining. And the condition I had in family lupus, the collagen, which is the glue in the body, it literally comes apart. I came unglued. Okay? So my body told me what was really going on. And I had to stop and listen, otherwise I would not have survived. Years later, when I was adequately diagnosed, the man said, and how did you don't have it anymore, how did you get through it? You cured yourself, there's no medication. There's no cure for this. What did you do? And I told him what I told you. I started keeping a journal, and I got all the stuff out of my system onto paper. And he said, that was very smart. That saved your life. If you had taken any more medication, you would have died. Your immune system would have been completely wiped out. Okay. So I just did that intuitively. So the things that I recommend for releasing emotions when you're in the midst of all the emotions that come up when you're a caregiver, the whole range of feeling exhausted, of feeling sad, of feeling angry, of feeling frustrated, of feeling confused. I mean, I can't tell you, many of you probably know how confusing it can be dealing with the medical profession with their terminology. When my father was going through cancer, it was just like, what? So what are you talking about now? And what are you recommending for treatment, and what exactly is going on? Surgery, chemo, radiation, I mean, it's very complicated sometimes. And so there you are trying to help the other individual, and you're in this fog. It's like, I don't understand these terms. I don't understand why this is happening or what's going on or what's expected of me and how to deal with it. So what I recommend is scribbling. It sounds very silly and simplistic, but it really works. I have a book, we have some copies here, Drawing Your Stress Away. And what I recommend people do, they don't even have to keep a journal. I do recommend keeping this stuff confidential because you don't need anybody else making fun of you, right? So if you're going to get a little notepad or any kind of paper, even a newspaper, and get some crayons out and scribble your feelings out, you don't want somebody saying, you are really crazy, you're going over the edge now, what are you doing? Or if you're drawing pictures of how you feel, and it's kind of strange looking, like my first ones were, I showed them to my daughter, and fortunately, she was very understanding. And she said to me, those look like brain drawings. And what she was really saying was it was coming out of another part of the brain, and it was. I found out later that this stuff comes from the right brain. That's where the emotions get expressed. Not through our left brain, not through words so much, but through the right brain. That's the part that can scribble and draw. And you don't have to be an artist. I know exactly what most of you were thinking. Well, she's an artist. She's an art therapist. She can say that. That's true. I have a degree in art, and I have a degree in art therapy. But it was very hard for me to do what I'm telling you when I was sick, because I was an artist. And I started scribbling, and I started making these drawings that looked like a 4-year-old's drawings, and I thought I was losing it. I said, what happened to all my degree in art and my skill? I made a living as a designer. What? Something is going wrong here. There must be something wrong. Why am I scribbling like this? But intuitively, I just had to get that frustration out. And of course, I was really angry at the doctors. The misdiagnosis, the medication, the pharmacy, all that comedy of errors that went on, I was really pissed off. And so I started just drawing. And one thing that my therapist introduced me to was my non-dominant hand. In my case, it's my left hand. She wanted me to experience my inner child, so she had me sit on the floor and write on a big piece of newsprint with a big fat kindergarten crayon. And I regressed to about 4 years old, 4.5, which is when I learned how to write my own name. And that's quite a task because it's a long name for a 4-year-old. And I just became a little kid again. And it was the most therapeutic moment in therapy for me, was to discover this intuitive and emotional and very expressive part of myself that was very down to earth and childlike. And so I felt much freer after that session where she did that. And then in my journal, I started writing and drawing with my non-dominant hand. And that's when these funny little 4-year-old pictures would come out, or one of my graduates calls it kindergarten art. She wrote a book about cancer. She used this to get through cancer. She just published it. And it's called Feeling the Shift. Cancer, faith, and kindergarten art. And between her prayer and the methods that I'm sharing with you today, she beat cancer twice, and she's in total remission now. And she wrote a beautiful book. I recommend it highly. It's called Feeling the Shift, Pat Clark. And she tells about her journey. And she did hers with cutout paper. She didn't have a lot of art materials around when she got diagnosed with cancer. 4th stage lymphoma.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's what she said. And the doctor looked at her the way doctors look at you, I guess, when you have a terminal illness and you probably don't have long to live. She said, I knew that look, I saw it. And she went home and started doing her journaling that I had taught her to do. And at one point, she got in touch with this critic inside that was putting her down for wasting time with this journal and cutting out paper and gluing it down. And she sassed back. She answered back and she told it to shut up. And then she kept on, and she sent that on a Caring Bridge online post, and I read it and I felt it, the shift in my stomach. I could feel it. And I said, I wrote right back, I posted, you just beat cancer, that's it. And she did. The next time she went for a test, she was cancer-free. And the doctor was in shock. 4th stage lymphoma, turned it around, cancer-free. And then it came back again a couple years later, and it was because she stopped doing the journaling. She started again, and she beat it again. Now it's been a couple of years. The doctors are amazed. She did not go through the second series of treatments. After 3, she said, I'm done. I don't want to do this again. And I'm doing my journaling instead, and she's fine. The doctor is still, what? What'd you do? So my point here is that this stuff works for self-healing, and it can really help you when you're dealing with these kinds of big decisions, if you're a caregiver, or if you have to make decisions for yourself in terms of your own care. And so the scribbling is the first step of just scribbling the feelings out, whatever they are, and just giving them a name. And the Drawing Your Stress Away book really has some very simple, and you can do it right in the book. You don't have to buy an extra journal or anything. Just buy just blank pages here with prompts. And all you need are crayons and some felt markers. It's very simple. It is kindergarten art. Anybody can do it. And it gives you the opportunity to just dump the feelings out and then write about them. What is the scribble, what was that scribble about? Oh, that really is how, I really feel angry about this. I'm really frustrated. I'm confused. Whatever it is, it'll come out. And it's up to you to choose the colors that you want to use. This is very personal. There's no right or wrong way to do it. You don't have to have talent. You don't have to have skill. You don't have any training, none of that. Little children, when given, their crayons and paper, they do this naturally. And we can do it too. So I always say, if a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old can do it, so can you. It's really simple. So the other option, of course, is to not necessarily keep a journal, but just use whatever supplies you have. Now, Pat, who beat 4th stage lymphoma, what'd she use? She used faded, sort of old construction paper that she had lying around from when she raised children. She's in her 70s now. She was a Presbyterian minister for a number of years, retired. And she had all this old paper hanging. I said, well, I guess I'll use it. I don't know. What am I going to do with it? Throw it out? So she cut pieces of paper and colors up and glued them in her journal. And she had notebooks and that sort of thing. But you don't need to have this practice of sitting down and doing a journal every day or even a couple of times a week. Just to use the art materials to get those feelings out so that you don't carry them in your body, because that's the closet. That's the only place they have to go. And we don't want it to go there. So what I'd like to do is open the floor for any questions about anything I've said so far. And I'd love to hear what your particular needs are right now, what you would like a tool to help you with. What kind of technique might help you deal with a challenge that you're dealing with right now? Anybody want to share that?
I think the way I'm looking at the way you're stating it is the drawings really are just a method of getting your thought process down on something.
That's right. It's not about a finished product, exactly.
You don't have to draw, you can make a circle.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I've had people do a box and a little stick figure in there and say they felt trapped. Simple as that. I mean, how simple can it get? And I always have to reinforce to people, this is not about a finished product. It's not about making art with a capital A. It's using art therapeutically, just like Dr. Pennebaker did in his research, where his control group studies were using writing therapeutically. They weren't writing essays, they weren't writing articles or books. They were just writing about what was going on with them. They had had an injury or an accident, or they had been sick, and they were writing about it. And that's all. It wasn't about it wasn't about grammar or spelling or anything like that. Now, when you use the non-dominant hand, that's the other issue here. It's harder to try to make something that looks pretty because your non-dominant hand is illiterate. It has not gone to school. It doesn't know how to read or write. And so it's awkward and it's slow. But you know what's great about that? It slows you down. And we all need to slow down in our society. We really do. So it forces you to slow down. Now, if you're used to being on all cylinders like I am most of the time, it's frustrating. I mean, I still, every now and then, my dominant hand's going to want to grab the pen. I can do that faster than you. Well, that's horrible handwriting. Let me write it. I can write better than that. Oh, you misspelled a word. You're a good speller. What are you doing? Why are you misspelling words? Well, because the non-dominant hand will misspell words. It'll be dyslexic. It'll flip letters around. It'll be hardly legible sometimes. When I'm working with private clients and they're reading their journal entries, they really have to stop. I wrote this, but I can't read this word. Can you help me figure this out? And I'm really good at deciphering non-dominant hand writing now. So lots of times I'll say, well, I think that is this word. Yeah, that's what I said. I can't read it now. So it's okay. Because, yeah, it's sloppy, it's illegible, it's misspelled, but that's not the point. The point is that when you use your non-dominant hand, you are tapping into the right brain. Okay? The left brain is the one that went to school. The left brain is literate. It reads and writes. That's what it does. It does math. Okay? But the right brain, what does it do? It has feelings and it expresses feelings. That's where artists are coming from. It also has visual spatial perception. So when you're doing drawing and all that, that's its cup of tea. It loves that. And it also has intuition and inner wisdom and guidance. Those times when you just have a hunch and you know it's right and you follow it and it's the right thing to do, like me throwing my medicine out. And you've had that experience, I'm sure. You know, my gut tells me to do this. Well, the right brain's very connected to the gut. It really is. So it has the specialty of dealing with those gut instincts and instinct, survival instinct, very connected to the right brain. So all of that is connected to your non-dominant hand. Say, what about left-handed people? The same thing happens to them. Why? Because their non-dominant hand never went to school either. So for them, it's their right hand that's the illiterate hand.
What page you talking about? Conversation between NDH and DH? It's like the left hand talking to the right hand.
Yes, that's what I do now. That's what this book's all about. I took it one further, and beyond just letting the non-dominant hand write, and this happened by accident, I didn't plan it. I was writing in my journal with my dominant hand, and all of a sudden, my left hand grabbed the pen and drew this picture that looked like a 4-year-old drew it. And I used to teach child development and art to teachers of child development. And I know the stages of development in art. And when I saw this, I really thought I was regressing. And I was. Because that's a 3-year-old. Okay? A 3-year-old has that conceptual framework about a person. A person is a body, a head, and arms and legs, and that's it. Right? And I've seen millions of drawings like this by 3- and 4-year-olds. So all of a sudden, this one started to talk. And she answered back to what was going on in my head, which was critical. So I was writing about some projects I wanted to do. I was still sick. And then all of a sudden, this dialogue happened. The critic is telling me I need to get up and go out and get a job and forget about this art project I wanted to do, and I need to make some money, and I've been in bed too long, and, you know, it's having an old naggy parent, you know, and you need to get to work, get a job. And I still didn't feel well enough to do that, but then this inner child kept sassing back. And so we had this dialogue back and forth. It changed my life. When I was through that dialogue, I realized, oh, I have just found the key to any kind of creative block. It's this critic. If you want to do anything new, the critic's going to show up, I can guarantee. Now, I don't have a writer's block anymore. I've been through that twice. But I've written 23 books, so obviously I'm not blocked in that department. But I started a new business 10 years ago, and you should have heard my critic driving me crazy. A gallery? Why do you want to open an art gallery? That's ridiculous. You don't have time for that. You have a private practice, and you have a training program, and you have this and that, and blah. And you don't know anything about business, and you were really bad at math. What's math have to do with it? I have a bookkeeper. But it gave me all the reasons why I shouldn't open that co-op art gallery with my friends in Cambria, where I live. But I have this tool, and I answered back. I said, shut up. I've always been successful at what I've done. I have a bookkeeper. I don't have to be good at math. I know how to use a cash register or whatever I need to use. Shut up. And all those reasons it was giving me not to go into new territory, I just shot them down one at a time. And I analyzed it. What are you saying? No, that's not true. No, I'll get help for that. And I opened the gallery, and it was quite successful. We were open for 10 years. We just closed in January, and I'm going on to other things now. But it depends on what your new frontier is. Anytime you have to push the envelope into new territory, and it could be this whole issue of caregiving. You know, that was new territory for me when my father came down with lung cancer. I'd never done that before. I had never dealt with chemo and all that stuff and gone to the doctors with him and all of that. And I had a lot of battles back and forth with both hands about whether I was capable of that. Because I was getting confused by all the medical jargon. And, you know, the part of me that didn't do well in math got really beat up in that process. Well, you're not smart enough to figure this out. You can't do this. Hey, I have to do it. I'm the only child. I have no choice. Sometimes we get pushed into a new frontier just because life is pushing us there. We have no choice. So this dialogue form is really great because when we have this inner conflict, and I used that when I chose a care facility for my father. I visited 2 or 3, and the one that we actually had him move into and I had the dialogue, and I have a dialogue with my inner guidance. It's kind of a Holy Spirit dialogue, and I said, please give me some guidance here. And the guidance I got was, that's the one. The man answered the question about what they do for their staff correctly, and you had a good feeling there, he had a good feeling there, just stick with that. But it's really hard when you've got several choices and there's a lot of factors involved in the decision. I know, it's hard. So I use this method throughout my caregiving time with both parents. And with my mother, I had to find somebody to live in with her because she wanted to stay at home. That was a tough one. We actually moved her into a facility. She had a room, and then at the last minute, no, I want to stay home. So we got a reverse mortgage, and I hired somebody to live in, and it was a hard one, but my attitude was, it's your house, Mom, you do what you want with it. I want you to have the final years the way you want it. And I'm glad I did it because she wanted to stay in that house. And it was very expensive, and it was very difficult, but I was willing to give her whatever she wanted. And I had to do these dialogues about that. Boy, that was a tough one. That was really hard. And also finding somebody that I trusted to take care of my mother, because I didn't live in the same city. That was a tough one. And I did this dialogue with that. It's like, we were looking at different options. And when we interviewed the woman we hired, I drew my pictures out about my feelings about it and then my dialogues, and I got some guidance. She was a saint, an angel. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for that woman. It was the right choice, but it was a tough one to come to. So that's the other issue with caregiving, is there's a lot of decisions to make. And then your critic comes in, oh, that's going to be the wrong one. Oh, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this. Oh, you're wrong. You've got to get that out of the way. But that dialogue form is the basis. It's what makes my work unique. The dialogue between the right and the left hand, and letting your left brain, your logical side of your brain, know what your right brain feels. Because it doesn't think, it feels. And that's just as important as thinking. And if they're not balanced, then we get in trouble. Yeah. It feels and it senses physically, and it senses instinctually, and it has emotions. That's what it's all about. So if you can imagine 2 people, one who's really left brain, we're sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley here, okay? One who's really left brain, another one who's very artistic and creative and very emotional. They could have a real hard time communicating with each other because the real left brain person does not think any of that is important. Those feelings, forget it. That's useless. That's just getting in the way. You're not going to be able to think clearly if you've got all those feelings going on. Forget that. And then you get completely cold, no empathy, totally inhuman if you go to the extreme of the left brain that's cut off from the right brain. If you're too far in the right brain, you're in emotion all the time. You can't make any common sense decisions because you're totally wrapped up and swallowed up by emotions. So we need both, and we need them to communicate. And they communicate through some fibers between the brains called the corpus callosum. And my work, according to scientists at UCLA, opens up new neuronal pathways, puts in new telephone wires between the 2 brains, and allows better communication between your feeling side and your thinking side. So it's not one or the other. It's both working in partnership together. And that's how it works. A lot of couples operate that way.
Chia, when you say also it's about respectful communication, like not the inner critic.
That's right.
But actually really listening to and honoring.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things about writing with the non-dominant hand is you have to use both sides, and that's where the listening happens. You're using the language of the left brain. You're using the alphabet. You're forming sentences. You've got grammar going on, spelling, all the rules of communication verbally. But the content is coming from the right brain. So it's talking in words, but it's expressing emotions and instinct and intuition. And that's the key. So according to Dr. Valerie Hunt at UCLA, my method does exactly that. It allows both sides to respect each other. And as she put it, I'm sneaking into the right brain behind the back door of the critic over here in the left brain. Because that's where the critic in us is. It's the critic that puts us down. It's the inner bully. I work with high school kids, and they really understand this inner bully in the left brain. They really do. And they'll stop me in the post office, in the market, and on the street, because it's a small town. Oh, Dr. Lucia, I want to thank you. The other day I had a critic attack. My inner bully was really putting me down, and I remembered what you said, and I just sat there and I turned around and I said, will you shut up? I ran into a gal waiting at a table in a restaurant in town recently. I worked with her 2-3 years ago. She's in college now, and she told me that she was using this at school because her critic would say, you know, you're not smart enough to do this. You're not going to make it. You're not, you know. And she says, I just tell it to shut up, and I go in and I take those exams, and I'm doing just fine. I just finished my freshman year. And she's thanking me for this technique. So these kids get it. They understand. They've got to keep that critic out of the way. That is one of the biggest stress factors that we all carry around. If you want to know what the real cause of most of our stress is, it's our self-criticism, our inner bully that tells us we're not doing it good enough. We didn't get it right. We should have done it this way. We should have done it that way. And that'll kill you every time. That'll just get you. That'll cause ulcers and headaches and migraines and all kinds of things. So we want to get that out of the picture. So that's the other piece of this work with the two sides of the brain. So any other comments or questions?
If you could explain the difference between the two workbooks?
Yes. Right. The other book is the Drawing Your Stress Away book is mostly about having ways to get your stress out on paper, scribbling, drawing, writing. And there's a whole series of prompts in this book with blank paper to do them on. This book is the one that saved my life. Hello, This Is Your Body Talking, in which you outline the body and you color in the areas that are stressed, that are in pain, discomfort. And then you have to have a conversation with each body part. So if you've got, I'll give you an example from one of my other books. A woman had chronic sinus congestion for 30 years. She was 35 at the time. She had started with that when she was 5 years old, and she did this exercise. She drew her sinus in, and then she did a dialogue. And as she's dialoguing, her non-dominant hand says, I want my mommy. And she burst out into tears. She kept on dialoguing. She followed the formula of the questions that I give. And at the end, she realized that this had happened, this had started when her parents got a divorce when she was 5 and left her to live with her grandparents. And she remembered for the first time in 30 years her grandmother's voice saying, Pamela, don't cry. You've got to be a brave little girl. So she didn't cry. 5 years old, she's lost her parents. She didn't cry. But what did she do? Where did she put her tears? Right here. She had been to every specialist. She had taken medication. They had talked about surgery. She had nothing but trouble with her sinuses all those 30 years. Guess what? After that dialogue, no more sinus problems. Gone. Pamela just passed away a few years ago. But over the years, she moved back to Iowa. Over the years, I stayed in touch with her. And she never had sinus congestion after that. So all those years from the mid-70s, from when she took my class, free of sinus. No surgery, no medication, nothing. Completely free of it. She had harbored tears for 30 years, unshed tears in her sinuses. Another woman who did this exercise had chronic bladder infections. She was 50 years old. She had had them for years. 30 years also. Same class. It was interesting. They joked about it. Their 30-year chronic problems. And she did a dialogue, and her bladder told her that she was critical of her anger, and she was angry at her fear. Angry at fear. So her emotions were all under the umbrella of this huge critic that was telling her to make those emotions go away. And where did she keep them? And the word pressure came out. And of course, when your bladder's full, you feel pressure. She was always pressuring herself to do more, do more. And that bladder infection went away after that one dialogue. The doctor was going to put her in the hospital for exploratory surgery because she'd had that problem for so long. And she said to him, I'm taking a class and this woman's teaching us how to talk to our body, and there was dead silence on the phone. Really dead silence. And he said, yeah, and Lucille, so what do you want? What are you saying? You don't want to go in the hospital? Well, I'm going to do these exercises she gave me, and then I'll talk to you. He says, all right, I'll make a deal with you. On Monday, if you still have the symptoms, you're going into the hospital. We're going to do exploratory surgery. If the symptoms are gone, then you talk to me and we'll negotiate. Well, the symptoms went away on Friday. Saturday, they didn't come back. Monday, she was fine. Then he said, all right, well, let's wait until Friday, see what happens. They never came back. She's another one. I stayed in touch with her for years. She moved to San Francisco. She ended up teaching writing classes to seniors in San Francisco because she became a writer after that. She wrote her autobiography. But that was one dialogue with her bladder in which her bladder told her why she was carrying around all of that infection, really, for years. It was all emotional. Now, that's not true of all illnesses. I have 2 hip replacements. Why? Because I was hit by a car years ago and thrown in the air and landed on the cement, and my body never fully aligned. So I have 2 hip replacements. I've had cataract surgery. You know, those things are physical as you get older, or if you have injuries, you got to deal with it. And I love surgery. I mean, I'm a walking example of successful surgery. I'm very grateful. But my doctor friends tell me that most of the people that walk into their offices are coming in because they are stressed. That what is going on with them is stress related. And if they could remove the stress or deal with the stress effectively, the conditions would probably go away. So let's get back to this whole challenge of caregiving, because that's really what we're here to talk about. Yes? Absolutely. I have gotten people off of anxiety and depression medication by doing this work. Yeah, definitely. I have a lady here who I worked with through cancer. She's been through chemo. And you want to say anything about your experience with
I
it?
just want to say that after I got home from the hospital, could you speak louder? Well, after I got home from the hospital, I was thinking, where am I going to get my strength? And when I got home, I saw Lucia's book, The Recovery of the Inner Child. And I remember how good I felt when I was reading it and doing all the methods in there. And I had thought I'm going to start reading it over again. So when I opened the first page, I saw her phone number and that she did coaching. And I thought, is this company still exist? Because I thought if I had coaching, I could heal. I really felt, because it was already good. I felt like that woman that said if I could just touch his robe, I would heal. And, well, she was told that her faith healed her. But when I called and Lucia called me back, I was so excited. I told my husband, I feel like I instantly healed. I really felt like that woman. But I'm very thankful for all her methods, because that turned all my fears into hope, and then my hope into faith, and that's what we need to heal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
all. Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. We have cancer support groups in McAllen, Texas, and we have seen miracles. Not just anxiety, but see, there is so much anxiety and fear around having a cancer diagnosis. That's a big part of it. And we have seen people go into remission and stay in remission. And we have one miracle story after the other with people at very advanced stages of cancer. So it's not only the psychological conditions of, anxiety, depression, and that sort of thing, but it's actually the physical manifestations too that can be healed with this. And I never guarantee anything, but in the case of somebody who really is open to it, has experienced it, and had relief in a workshop before she was diagnosed, it really works, because if you stay with it and really do the method, you get results. It's really amazing. So I'm an art therapist, so I deal mostly with the mental health issues. But because I have had so many people read my story about how I healed from a life-threatening illness that had no cure, they go, well, if she did it on herself, maybe she can help me. So they find me. Yeah.
I think when you start getting involved with caregiving, it's like it's opening a big old door, but part of the caregiving is all these little teeny doors that you run in as you develop a rapport with the person.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing to overcome, because new things are coming up over and over and different.
That's right.
And input is coming from
That's right. It gets very confusing, and overwhelming is the word I would put to it, because I felt overwhelmed so often when I was caregiving both my parents at different times. I would just feel overwhelmed. It was like too many decisions, too much information, too many emotions coming up, and it was just overwhelming. Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
Somehow lightened your energies to make you more tolerant and available?
Absolutely. I feel so much empathy for anybody dealing with a life-threatening diagnosis, or a chronic illness, or deteriorating, illness that involves deterioration, because I've been there either as a caregiver or myself. And my heart goes out to anybody who's dealing with it, because I went through it and I know what it's like. And it's nothing I learned from a textbook. There are a lot of people in the mental health field that learned a lot from textbooks. But if you haven't been down that path, you really can't say, yes, I understand. I have an idea of what you're going through. I've been down that path. So I really understood when Rosemary called me what she was going through because of her diagnosis, and she was going to have to go through chemo and all of that stuff. And I've been there with my dad. The most common reaction I get from family caregivers is guilt. They feel guilty that they're angry or frustrated, or they're getting overwhelmed or exhausted. They say they're feeling guilty. Where's that coming from? And I'll explain to them, it comes from your critic. Your critic's the one that makes you feel guilty. They'll say, oh, your father's in pain right now. What are you complaining about? Oh, just because you're confused about medical jargon? Well, so what? He's suffering. He's having surgery. He's in pain. And the critic comes in and makes you feel guilty for having any emotions about what's going on. And I've heard that a lot from family members whose family member is the patient and they're the caregiver. And they will admit to me that they feel guilty for complaining. Well, it isn't about complaining. It's just about owning your own feelings. It's okay to have feelings. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
One last thing. Kensington has a resource for caregiver support group, and it's every week. And so we will put that information in an email to you as a follow-up to this.
Great.
Because I could not agree more that support groups
So
are
everything.
critical and to survive.
Yeah. And that's what they're doing for their staff by bringing Marcia Nelson in to support them to do the work they do. And that's why I have so much confidence in what they're doing, because they're doing it right. They're feeding and nurturing their staff, who in turn can then nurture others. And I think that your support outreach is just brilliant, and it's so much needed. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I have some index cards. If anybody would like to be on my mailing list, we will bring it around if you put your hands up. And all I need is your name and your email address. And I do mailings for events. I come up here occasionally. And I also do individual coaching, as Rosie pointed out. I am very grateful to be here today and to help and support Kensington Place in the wonderful work they do. And I appreciate meeting you and hearing your concerns. And I'll be here signing books. So if you have any questions, feel free to come over and ask me. And we have books for sale. And I can tell you a little bit more about the application if you need that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.